Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Ann Meredith, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for this webinar hosted by UPS Supply Chain Solutions. We've got an exciting session lined up for you today, packed with insights on Canadian regulatory initiatives that will help you understand the current customs framework affecting your business. But before we begin, I have a few admin updates to share. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to everybody who registered. We encourage participation and would like to ensure we answer your questions, so please make use of the Q&A function at any point during the call. We'll try our best to answer your questions live on the call through the Q&A function, or if necessary, we will contact you privately after the call. Also, after the webinar has finished, please watch for a post-webinar pop-up survey to appear. If you could fill that out, we appreciate any and all feedback you may have. And now for legal purposes, I will read the following statement verbatim. At the date of this publication, policies are evolving. This presentation is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice. Please consult with your own legal counsel for such advice. Do not rely on this information without performing your own research. All right, with that, let's start by introducing our distinguished speakers who bring a wealth of experience and insight to today's discussion. As mentioned, my name is Ann Meredith, and I'm Senior Marketing Analyst for UPS Supply Chain Solutions. We have Penny Moulton, Director of Trade Management Services and Trade Compliance, UPS SCS Canada, and Kathleen Ann Singer, Supervisor of Customs Compliance for Canada Brokerage, UPS SCS Canada. Now, if we move into the agenda, we're going to start today's webinar talking about CBSA Assessment and Revenue Management, or CARM. We'll touch on some important dates, payment policies, CARM client portal, pre-authorized debit, and much more. Then we will talk about CBSA audits and US and Canada shifting trade policies and other pertinent information. So without further ado, let's dive into our first topic, and I'll turn it over to Kathleen to get us started.
Thank you, Ann. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar. As we all know, CARM went live October 21st, 2024. Some key items to remember. It is important that you assign 2 business account managers in the CARM client portal. Please remember to log into the portal on a regular basis so you do not lose your access privileges. The commercial accounting documents are available in the CARM client portal to download for your record keeping. Please ensure to download your CADs for your own record-keeping requirements. There is less than 60 days left until the 180-day grace period ends for the release prior to payment. CBSA requires all importers, including NRI, to post financial security. Today, for those of you with a bond in place, we'll continue with the release prior to payment privileges. For those of you without financial security in place, you will be required to obtain a cash or a surety bond prior to April 19th in order to continue with release prior to payment. If a bond is not in place at that time, clearances will be delayed. Without having financial security in place, duties and taxes must be paid in advance of clearance. Now we'll talk about late payment and interest. Up to March 31st, 2025, CBSA will not issue late payment penalties or interest. However, on April 1st, 2025, importers who have an overdue balance will be subject to late payment penalties and interest. These amounts will show on the April statement of account. I suggest if you have late payments to issue payments as soon as possible to avoid interest from continuing to accrue. Now we'll talk about the payment policy. All payments must be in Canadian currency. Foreign banks must go through a Canadian clearer. The importer becomes liable for payment of all debts in the account. The billing cycle is harmonized. Monthly payment is due 10 weekdays, inclusive of holidays after the 17th of any given month. The payment due date is shown in CARM. Please ensure that payments are made timely, with time given if required for the payments to be processed by your bank. There may be times when the statement of account, which is issued on the 25th of every month, may differ from what is actually owing at the end of the month. The reason for this is the statement of account is a point in time, and entries, including corrections, may be processed during that time and be owing in that billing cycle. You can view the particulars in the transaction history on the portal. Available methods for payments. Online banking. CBSA has a list of approved banks that importers can work with to remit payments through online banking. Please discuss this option with your bank. CBSA continues to work with additional banks to have them added to the list. CARM Client Portal Pre-Authorized Debit, known as PAD. The CARM Client Portal Pre-Authorized Debit can be set up in advance through the Payments option in CARM. You are required to register each RM number with a PAD agreement. As an importer into Canada, if you use more than one RM number to import, they must each have a separate agreement. CBSA will issue one PAD withdrawal per month on the payment due date. Payment withdrawal starts on the payment due date and can take several days to appear as processed in the CARM portal. CBSA are notified of rejected payments by the payment company and can occur up to 60 days after payment is processed. If the payment is not processed after the 15th of the month, please contact the CARM Help Desk. Electronic payment benefits. EDI 820, or Payment Remittance Advice, is a key EDI document that confirms payment details and delivers remittance among trading partners. Electronic payments must be set up in advance with the CBSA and their IT group. With electronic payments, the transaction can be completed on the payment due date and will be processed on the date of submission. With the electronic payments, it improves data accuracy. Credit card payment. There have been instances where importers have made multiple payments with a credit card debit option of the payment of $4,999.99 within a billing cycle, which is non-compliant under the CBSA policy in CARM. If you are making multiple payments in this manner, you will be contacted by the CBSA to review the non-compliance of the policy. Currently, the credit cards that are accepted are Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. And now I'll turn it over to Penny Moulton.
Great, thanks, Kathy. And you can certainly see how CARM has changed, how your processes and procedures are impacted, especially when it comes to payments and having your own security. So certainly a reminder to everyone, if you haven't already gotten a method of security with CBSA, you'll need to get that by April the 18th. So I'm going to talk about CBSA audits. What does CBSA audit? They audit the origin, the valuation, and the HS classification. The implementation of CARM gives CBSA the opportunity to generate reports using AI. They can look for specific criteria when generating their reports and may ask you for more details or information. Make sure your database is up to date. If you haven't looked at it for a while in regards to your tariff classification, just a shout out to have it be updated and when you work with your customs broker. And when was the last time you reviewed your pricing? Are there adjustments that should be made? Making sure if there's something that could be added or removed that you are taking that into account as the entry is being completed. You also could go for a classification ruling on your goods, and this allows you to better determine the HS classification and make sure that it is correct. The last thing you want is to get an audit where CBSA will go back 4 years in your HS classification, you should have been paying 9.5% duty or something like that. So CBSA manages trade compliance with tariff classification, valuation, and origin using what's called random verification. The random verification, they look at risk assessment, revenue assessment, and promoting voluntary compliance. And I'll get into that in a little bit further details. They also have what's called verification priorities. So 2 times per year, CBSA publishes target-based priorities. And these priorities generally, if customs are continuing to make money on them, for example, gloves is one of the items which is a target-based priority, they will continue to have this as a priority. And they are obviously making revenue having these target-based priorities. But the random verifications, it's important if you receive a notification from CBSA that you act on it immediately because they are time sensitive. And you make sure they can go back up to 4 years. So it's important to be able to have your record keeping and things like that in place. One of the things that you could do is verify what's declared to CBSA and what you've actually paid for the goods match. Because the last thing you want is something where you're paying more for it than what was declared to CBSA. So customs have what's called a trade advisory notice, a directed compliance letter, and a compliance validation letter. CBSA may send these to your company address that's listed in CARM or the one that you registered, and it may come by mail. They also are trying to publish them in CARM. So if you get either an audit or a trade advisory notice, a directed compliance letter, or a compliance validation letter, they could be in CARM as well. So the trade advisory notice is really a request for further information. There's no AMPS penalty applied to this. I strongly suggest that you do reply back to CBSA. However, and advise your customs broker if you get one, so that, making sure that, again, the database is up to date. The compliance validation letter, known as the compliance CVL, it addresses instances of suspected non-compliance, and it's a letter to the importer to provide information within the 30-day time period. And then the directed compliance letter addresses instances of known non-compliance, and it's a letter to the importer with an AMPS penalty. And note that these verification tools only focus on 1 or 2 shipments rather than going back 4 years. So from a compliance standpoint, if you're not being compliant, then certainly you're notified early and you don't have to go back the 4 years. So free trade agreements, understand the requirements to use if you are going to use a preferential tariff agreement and to ensure that you are in compliance. But some of the rules are different for different preferential tariffs. So it could be rules of origin, proof of origin requirements, a manufacturer's affidavit may be required. It just depends on that free trade agreement. So customs validation, does your company have any supplemental payments, related party transactions, trade discounts, stock transfers, assists, anything like that? So from an assist standpoint, for an example, are you using molds in the production of your goods, and did you pay for those molds, and are they used to further manufacture, even though you maybe got the molds in the United States, and for example, the goods are being manufactured in China? We have to make sure that that is calculated in the value for duty for customs. The other one that comes up often is, are there overages and shortages in your shipments? And what do you do when there are? So you want to make sure that corrections are done with CBSA timely if there are overages and shortages, and making sure you're declaring to customs exactly what you did receive. So voluntary disclosures, it can't be prompted by any activity or action taken by CBSA or PGA or an audit or anything like that. You have to do it obviously before that happens, and making sure that everyone knows mistakes happen. But if you disclose the previously unreported information, or incorrect, inaccurate, or incomplete information, many times from a voluntary disclosure standpoint, it could be to do with valuation. So for example, you're bringing in the goods into Canada and you've got, you've always got the same unit price, but you find out later that the unit price is actually higher. So that would be a time when to do a voluntary disclosure, and doing so will reduce your penalties and interest. It could be that you're going to be paying a different type of interest rather than the regular CBSA interest. So we'll talk about the US and Canada shifting trade policies, obviously very timely. And we all know that it's very fluid. So the Canadian tariffs are in effect. They started at 12:01 today. So what Canada has responded with a 25% tariff against 155 billion of American goods, starting with 30 billion immediately. And the tariffs on the remaining 125 billion of goods will be in 21 days' time. Canadian tariffs will remain in place until the US trade action is withdrawn. So Customs actually did issue a customs notice, which is Customs Notice 25-10. So you can see it online. But President Trump confirmed the 25% on all Canadian goods entering the US. And it was in effect March 3rd at midnight. And note that it's going to be what's called a surtax. So the surtax applies to goods imported from the US, including those eligible for remission duties under the Postal and Courier Imports Remission Order. So that's something that's new, that's been added for this new customs notice that was just issued. So I have a question for you. So given that the trade between US, Canada, and Mexico is governed by the US, Mexico, Canada, or CUSMA USMCA free trade agreement, tariffs will only apply to goods not included in the trade agreement. Is this true or false? This is false. Almost all goods traded between the three countries governed by the USMCA or CUSMA, but the tariffs are imposed through what's called an executive order, will override USMCA or CUSMA and require duties to be paid on all tariffed goods. And again, it's called a surtax. So the surtax will be applied to anything that's on the list, and you can be able to see that in the customs notice. There's also a link in the presentation here today. And I also want to point out that Canada tariffs, if they continue past April 19th, they may have bond implications. So as everybody knows, and Kathy explained, you'll need to have some kind of a security with CBSA, and therefore you may need to increase it based on the tariffs. So you'll need to watch this very closely. So sanctions, we'll talk a little bit about sanctions and due diligence for third parties. So Global Affairs publishes the regulations. However, they cannot provide legal advice. A lot of people don't realize this, but they have the regulations, but they can't provide the legal advice. So Canada sanctions are imposed under the United Nations Act, the Special Economic Measures Act, or the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act. So Canada has imposed sanctions under UNA and SEMA in relation to the following countries. So you can see there's a lot of countries on there, but if you're dealing with any of the countries listed, you want to make sure that you completely understand what could be some implications of dealing with these countries, and depending on the goods and things like that. But certainly do your homework and make sure that you are in compliance with these countries. So there's different types of sanctions, arms and related materials embargo, dealings ban, import and export restrictions, financial prohibitions, related measures, and technical assistance prohibitions. So just to make sure from a sanction standpoint, you want to make sure, if you're dealing with one of the countries listed, and you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're shipping there is not going to be used, for example, in the manufacture of weapons or something like that. So sanction regulations against Russia and China. You can review the restricted goods and technology list on Global Affairs Canada website, also known as GAC. And then the sanctions related to Russia were imposed under the Special Economics Measure Acts. And it also could be prohibited individuals or designated persons and entities that the sanctions are applied against. I know recently CBS or GAC issued a notice for individuals that had been added to the sanction list. So make sure you're doing your due diligence and that you're constantly following up to see if there's anything new or anything else added to that list. The last thing you want is the negative publicity because you ship something to a sanctioned country or some kind of good you shipped, and it turns out that it was used in weapons or something like that. So when does a prohibition apply? So I'll give you an example. A Canadian company has entered into a contract with a non-designated Russian company. We'll call that company B as per the contract. And A sends funds to B in return for the delivery of the non-designated goods. At a given time, company B is designated under the Special Economic Measures Russia regulations and is thus subject to a dealings ban. At that time that the designation came into force, A had not yet fully paid, but B had already delivered the goods to A. So notwithstanding the fact that company A entered into the contract with company B before the latter was listed as a designated company, any dealings or transactions with company B after the date that the designation came into force would be considered a contravention of the dealings ban. So just to be clear, I think that's a really good example, and you want to make sure that you know, you're not involved in that type of a situation. So the China surtax remission order, in October 22nd, Canada imposed a 25% surtax on steel aluminum goods originating from China. So they've since issued a surtax remission order, and it was published in a customs notice 25-05 on February the 4th. So importers who paid surtax from October 22nd to January 31st, 2025 will have a potential surtax refund. So the remission has been for goods from October 22nd to December 31st. So if you fall within that category, you can potentially get a refund on the surtax paid. So Schedule 1 lists goods to qualify for the exemption. Goods must match the product description and the classification. And Schedule 2 actually applies to specific importers, which are listed by their business number. And you can apply for exemption from the Department of Finance to be on Schedule 2. But you obviously have to include backup to substantiate your request. And the goods cannot be subsequently exported to the US in the same condition. And the claims for remission must be submitted within 2 years after the date of importation. So general import permits, so these are through GAC as well, but it applies to carbon steel and specialty steel products as well as aluminum. So anytime that you're importing any of the goods that are in general import permit number 80, 81, or 83, we need to provide CBSA specific information, which ends up going to Global Affairs Canada. So what is new as far as this goes is for the steel, the carbon steel and the specialty steel products, we now need to provide the country of melt and pour. So from a, that's from a steel standpoint. Now for aluminum products, GAC is considering implementing the country of smelt and cast requirements for aluminum within the next 1 to 2 years. They actually published where you could send in any comments or anything like that. They haven't responded from that as of yet, but certainly they will be doing that in the next little while. So if that's something that impacts you as an importer into Canada, you can certainly continue to look and get that information once they provide feedback and comments, and we'll have more clarity around being applicable within the next 1 to 2 years. So liability for accounting after final accounting. So this is something that's coming into effect January 1st, 2026, but as everybody knows, time flies, so it won't be too long before it comes into effect. But an importer of record may become liable for additional duties after final accounting, as far as determinations, further redeterminations, reappraisal, or other legislative obligations. So importers' obligations are to make corrections to declarations and pay duties owed when they have reason to believe their declarations are incorrect. And that also applies to say you declared more than what you should have. Corrections should also be done on those types of files as well. Some people think, well, customs got more money than what they needed, but they still, from a CBSA liability standpoint, you still need to do those corrections as well. Any GST would not be credited back, but certainly if there's duty implications, then you would get that duty difference back, or you would pay the additional duties depending on what the circumstances was. So CBSA, like I said, would do, if they did a redetermination or anything like that, sometimes they focus on a few shipments, but your liability is to make sure that you're going back and correcting same and similar goods, and making sure that all the corrections are done for all of them, even though CBSA may not have flagged all of the files that are impacted. You know which files they are, so you'll need to do corrections on all of those files up to 4 years. So forced labor, I know this has been certainly in the news a lot recently, but making sure that you don't have forced labor in your supply chain. And, you know, some of the things that come up from a supply chain standpoint with regards to forced labor could be withholding wages, deception, physical and sexual abuse, restriction on movement of the workers, excessive overtime, intimidation and threats, retention of identity documents, and just, you know, understand your supply chain, know where your goods are from, and know where, you know, if they're coming from another country, whereabouts in that other country, are there specific issues or anything like that. From a CBSA standpoint, they're continuing to update the D memo. It hasn't been updated as of yet, but they will be doing that. And in doing so, they are planning to, when they go to ask for further information, they can either get it from you as the importer into Canada or from the actual supplier. And they would reach out to the supplier, obviously asking you in advance to do that. If they don't get the information that they're looking for, they will actually hold the shipment and not allow it to come into Canada. But that's not, you know, certainly you don't want to get into that situation where you've got your shipment arrived in Canada and you're waiting to, it's already sold or whatever it might be, and you're not able to bring it into Canada because of potential forced labor. So you want to make sure that you understand that and have that, you know, it's not in your supply chain. And also is on May 31st of this year, there is a report that's due with the Minister of Public Safety. So last year was the first year that it was required. I don't believe as of yet they're charging any penalties for not completing the report, or for late completion of the report, I should say. But I suggest if it is something that you need to complete, and the criteria is on the public safety website, but if it is something that you are required to complete, I suggest that you make sure that it is done for 2025 on time. Probably penalties will be applied for late filing of this report, but you can also view other reports in there that other companies have have put into the filing. So I know we talked a lot today, and certainly there's a lot of information. As Anne said earlier, we will be sending the link out for the presentation, and as well as the recording. And so if you have any questions, you can reach out to us, but just want to remind you that you need to obtain your bond by April the 18th, and make sure you've got that in place. Again, with the tariffs coming into effect, or the surtax tariffs coming into effect, make sure you're monitoring that, because like I said, you may need to increase your bond amount, and you'll need to do that in order to continue to be able to import. Also, if you don't have a bond in place, you will not be able to import your goods, because will need to get security in place before you do that. So ensure payments are made timely up to March 31st. As you know, CBSA will be charging interest on any late penalties, as well as they could charge you late payment penalties, which is an AMPS penalty that will be applicable for that late payment. And you might not get that penalty right away, because customs, what they'll do, as Kathy said, they could, if you're using PAD, for example, pre-authorized debit for payment, they may pull the payment. And if it's late, it might take them a few days for it to go through the process, and you might get the penalty after that. So any penalties, any AMPS penalties, there will be in CARM, and they will also show on your statement of account each month. So the surtax duty refund for steel and aluminum is from October the 22nd to January 31st. So if that applies to you, we can certainly do a refund for those goods that were imported during that time when the surtax was paid. And understand how the United States surtax order will affect your company. As I said, the customs notice 2510 was issued this morning, and it's got the information, the tariff classifications that it's applicable to at this point. And then starting in 21 days time, the remaining 125 billion of goods will be applicable to the surtax. So the Canadian tariffs or surtaxes will remain in place until the US trade action is withdrawn. And with that, I will turn it over to Anne.
Thank you, Penny. Yeah, I would just like to take a few minutes and thank Penny and Kathleen for sharing really important insights from their respective areas of expertise. I think it was super helpful, especially at this time of year with everything going on. So thank you both again. And it looks like everyone has been very active in submitting questions in the Q&A function. So thank you for that. As we continue to answer those, I have 3 very commonly asked questions that we're going to take here live, and then maybe a few others that have been put in the chat. The first one, Kathleen, is for you. What if I'm not registered on the CARM portal? Can I still have my shipment cleared?
Hi, Ann. Thank you. So as of April 19th, if you're not registered on the portal to delegate access to the broker, they will not be able to clear the goods.
Okay. Thank you. Second one, also Kathleen, directed towards you, is what if I do not have RPP in place by April 19th?
So if the RPP is not in place by April 19th, the importer will be required to remit the duties and taxes in advance of the customs clearance.
Okay. Thank you. Penny, this one is for you. If I receive a customs audit, do I notify my broker?
Yes, I would definitely notify your broker. And also just be cognizant of the timeframes, because it does go by fast. And sometimes you aren't able to get an extension for whatever reason. It's up to the officer's discretion. So certainly it takes a while, even though it might only be 4 or 5 entries to begin with that you need to pull the information on, and you think it's relatively simple. Sometimes it's applicable, as I said in the presentation, to many different files that are same or similar to that, what CBSA are asking about. And
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I do see there's a couple questions around the paper bond. Many companies have a paper bond already. So as far as getting it into CARM, you'll need to contact your bond provider, and they will be able to walk you through what you need to do to get that uploaded into CARM. And it may show already in CARM. If you log into CARM, it may show already in CARM what your bond amount is that you have. And that means that CBSA and your bond company already have that information. So you're all set.
Perfect. And then I have a couple. One is, who is responsible for creating a CAD, the customer broker or the IOR?
So it is normally the broker that would complete the CAD from the information. So the broker will get the shipment cleared for you as the importer of record. And this applies to resident and non-resident, as well as the theme throughout this presentation applies to resident and non-resident importers. But certainly it is the broker that would complete the CAD, the commercial accounting document, transmit the information to CBSA. And then once it's finished and accounted for, the CAD can be found actually in the CARM client portal, and suggest that you download that CAD and put it with your record keeping, making sure that you've got it on file.
Okay, there was another, we are a software company in the US with offices in Canada. We only ship IT equipment and business documents to our offices for office use only, not for resale. Do we still need to register with CARM?
So whoever is the importer of record into Canada, if you're a non-resident importer or a resident importer, if they are commercial goods, yes, you absolutely have to register in CARM and delegate access to be able to continue to clear those shipments into Canada.
Thank you. One last one here. How can we set up a foreign bank to make payment for pre-authorized debits? I'm assuming if UPS is authorizing paying our CARM and we don't need to do anything. We have a bond in place.
Yeah, if you have a bond in place, that's great. From a UPS SCS standpoint, you would still need to pay CBSA for those duties and taxes. So you can do it through the different methods that Kathy described when she was doing the presentation. Or also there is an option to make a payment to, for example, to UPS SCS, and we would remit that to CBSA at the end of the month, as long as we receive the funds within that time period.
Perfect. And I think we have time for one last one. If our company is listed in the Schedule 2, how do we get the remission? Is it UPS's responsibility to report the special remission code on the CAD?
Right. So if you've put your application in and you've gotten the remission for the duty surtax, I suggest that you reach out to your account manager, just making sure that we have that information in our system, and that way, you know, everybody understands that it's applicable to you as the importer of record, and we will make sure that that's updated in our system as well. And again, that goes back to line codes and tariff classification. You know, if it is applicable to your goods, you'll need to advise, and that way we can do those required updates and making sure that you're not paying duty when you shouldn't be for shipments coming in.
Thank you, Penny. Okay, well, that concludes today's webinar. If there were some questions we missed, we will certainly reach out to you privately after the call, make sure those get answered. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us through the contact information on the slide or the post-event survey. Once again, we appreciate your trust in UPS and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Penny.